Today, feeding animals costs money. In the Middle Ages, peasants did it for free. No store, no coins, no problem. They used what was around them. Everyday things that cost nothing. Here's how they kept animals fed without spending anything at all. In medieval times, feeding animals wasn't about running to the pet store or ordering a pallet of feed online. Peasants mastered the art of letting nature do the heavy lifting, especially when it came to forest feeding. Pigs were the ultimate forest vacuum cleaners. Release a group of these snuffling creatures into the woods during autumn, and they perform what medieval folks called pannage, the practice of fattening pigs on fallen forest nuts. These porky bulldozers would root through the leaf litter, snuffling up acorns, chestnuts, and beech nuts by the mouthful. A single mature oak could drop up to 700 pounds of acorns in a good year, enough to fatten several pigs for weeks without the peasant lifting a finger. The medieval version of DoorDash was literally door-to-forest service, except the pigs picked up their own takeout. Many medieval communities had specific pig woods designated in local charters and laws. These forest areas were carefully managed to maximize nut production. Records from one English manor show they valued their oak forests more for pig feeding than for timber, calculating that 50 mature oak trees could fatten 30 pigs from September to November without any supplemental feed needed. Goats brought their climbing skills to the forest buffet. While pigs focused downward, goats looked upward, stretching to reach tender young tree shoots, stripping bark and munching ivy that grew up tree trunks. Their flexible upper lips allowed them to pluck precise bits of growth from between thorns or tight spaces. Medieval peasants valued goats partly because they could digest plants toxic to other livestock, including yew and hemlock that would kill a cow. These walking garbage disposals with horns could turn poisonous plants into milk, which proves that even in medieval times, there was such a thing as a free lunch. The medieval forest provided specialty snacks that modern farmers might overlook. Young ferns unfurling in spring were eagerly consumed by both goats and pigs. Wild mushrooms, avoided by humans due to poisoning fears, were safely consumed by certain animals with more resistant digestive systems. Even pine needles rich in vitamin C were browsed by goats during winter months when other green food was scarce. Cows and sheep preferred the forest edges and clearings where sunlight encouraged grass growth. They'd graze on wild varieties of clover, fescue, and meadow grasses that modern lawns still contain today. Interestingly, forest grazing actually helped maintain these clearings, creating the patchwork forest landscapes still seen in parts of Europe. One cow could consume over 100 pounds of fresh vegetation daily, vegetation the peasant never had to grow, water, or harvest. Geese were the wetland specialists waddling along forest streams to feed on seeds, aquatic plants, and small water creatures. Their wide bills were perfect for sifting through mud for roots and invertebrates. A flock of geese could effectively police an area for fallen seeds and berries that other animals missed. Medieval peasants would often just point geese toward a promising area and let them handle the rest. They were basically living lawnmowers with attitude problems. Perhaps most remarkable about this forest feeding system was its sustainability. Records show some European forests supported this type of animal husbandry for hundreds of consecutive years without depleting. The animals spread seeds through their droppings, pruned vegetation at different heights, and fertilized the soil, all while converting inedible forest products into meat, milk, and eggs for human consumption. What made the system work was timing and rotation. Peasants didn't just release animals randomly, they followed seasons and forest cycles. Pigs went in during autumn nutfall, while spring browsing was better for goats when new growth appeared. This prevented overgrazing and allowed forest regeneration. But the forest was just one piece of the medieval feeding puzzle. When animals returned from their woodland buffet, they'd find that the creative peasant household had even more free food waiting for them. When it came to feeding animals, medieval households took the phrase "waste not, want not" to an entirely new level. While the forest provided one source of free animal feed, the kitchen table offered another goldmine of nutritional opportunities. Every medieval home kept what we might call a slop bucket, but they viewed it as more of a savings account. These wooden pails or clay pots sat near the cooking area, collecting everything from vegetable peelings to bread crusts. Records from one English abbey kitchen in the 1300s show they saved an estimated 400 pounds of food scraps yearly, enough to provide nearly 15% of their pigs' diet without spending an extra penny. If medieval financial advisors existed, they'd call this the scraps to bacon investment strategy. The feeding hierarchy was strict and sensible. Humans ate first, taking the best parts of any food. Chickens got the smaller scraps that required pecking, breadcrumbs, grain bits, and tiny food fragments. Pigs received the bulk of household waste since their omnivorous appetites and strong digestive systems could handle almost anything. Medieval pigs were essentially furry garbage disposals with a bacon bonus plan. Winter presented special challenges for storing slop. To prevent freezing, many households kept their scrap buckets near the hearth, where the residual warmth kept the contents from turning into food scrap popsicles. This placement had the added benefit of encouraging fermentation, which pigs actually prefer. Their taste buds find slightly soured food more appealing. Those medieval swine were the original sourdough hipsters, preferring their slop with just the right amount of funk. Dairy waste became premium animal feed. When milk soured or butter went rancid, it went straight to the waiting animals. Cheese-making byproducts like whey provided protein-rich liquid that chickens and pigs thrived on. One medieval farming manual from the 1400s specifically recommends feeding whey to growing piglets to help them develop strong bones. Talk about medieval recycling. Their whey protein shakes just happened to come with oinks of appreciation. Nothing edible escaped repurposing. Bones from the table weren't just tossed out after people finished with them. Even after humans had picked them clean and sucked out the marrow, bones went to dogs who would crunch and gnaw them further. The smallest bone fragments then joined the pig slop, where they provided calcium and minerals. Medieval households managed a bone recycling program that would make modern zero-waste influencers weep with joy. Holiday feasts created animal feast days, too. After a village celebration or a rare meat-heavy meal, animals enjoyed days of richer scraps. This was especially true after autumn butchering, when organs and trimmed fat provided high-energy food that helped animals put on weight before winter. The peasant version of trickle-down economics actually worked. The leftovers from human feasts became animal banquets. Some households even cultivated specific waste-to-feed practices. Porridge left stuck to pot bottoms would be soaked in water overnight, creating a nutritious slurry for morning chicken feed. Bread that had gone too hard for human consumption found a new purpose when soaked in water or cooking juices. If medieval chickens could talk, they'd probably request yesterday's porridge pot soaked overnight with a side of stale breadcrumbs as their signature breakfast. Medieval householders knew their animals' preferences too. Chickens eagerly devoured crushed eggshells, providing calcium for more egg production, while pigs preferred their food slightly fermented or soured. Geese would fight over scraps of fat, and goats would pick through mixed slop for the most fibrous bits. These peasants were the original farm-to-table food critics, carefully observing which slop combinations got 5 grunt reviews from their porcine food critics. The medieval slop feeding system was surprisingly sophisticated. Families often kept separate buckets for different animals, knowing that what pleased a pig might not satisfy a chicken. Special wooden feeding troughs were carved with dividers to prevent food competition, ensuring even the smallest or weakest animals got their fair share of the table's bounty. After picking through the household leftovers, these well-fed animals often wandered out to the fields, where another bounty of free food awaited in the form of agricultural byproducts that modern farmers might simply plow under. Beyond forests and household waste, medieval fields and gardens produced a bonanza of free animal feed that modern farmers might overlook. After harvest time, fields transformed into open-air buffets where animals feasted on agricultural leftovers. The practice called gleaning wasn't just for poor people gathering missed grain. Animals got in on this action too. Once human harvesters finished collecting crops, farmers would open field gates and let in a parade of hungry mouths. First came geese, who picked up fallen grain and small seeds. Next, sheep and cows moved through, eating taller stalks and leaves. Last came the pigs, who rooted up any remaining roots or tubers. Studies of medieval agriculture suggest this sequenced grazing recovered up to 20% of a field's total biomass as animal feed instead of leaving it to rot. Cabbage fields offered particularly rich pickings. Medieval varieties grew enormous. Some cabbage heads weighed up to 40 pounds. Farmers harvested the central head for humans, but left outer leaves attached to the stems. These leftover leaves were like all-you-can-eat salad bars for medieval livestock. The cows didn't even complain about the lack of ranch dressing. Smart peasants planned their harvests with animal feeding in mind. When pulling root vegetables like turnips and carrots, they'd cut off the tops and toss them in a pile rather than carrying the extra weight home. By day's end, these heaps of nutrient-rich greens were ready for hungry animals. A single acre of root crops could produce up to a ton of leafy tops. Free animal feed growing above what humans actually wanted. Grain threshing created another feeding opportunity. The process of separating grain from stalks produced chaff, the papery husks and bits unsuitable for human use. Mixed with a little water, chaff became a fiber-rich feed that helped animals through winter. Medieval animals didn't turn up their noses at chaff. Unlike modern teenagers asked to eat vegetables, these creatures knew not to look a gift chaff in the mouth. Field edges and borders became strategic growing spots. Peasants would plant fast-growing crops like turnips along field margins specifically for animal consumption. These weren't even harvested. Animals were simply allowed to graze them directly. This practice, called catch cropping, maximized land use by growing animal feed in spaces too small for main crops. Bean plants created perfect dual-purpose crops. Humans harvested the beans, while animals ate the nitrogen-rich vines and leaves. These plant remains contained so much protein that some medieval tax records valued bean straw at half the price of hay. Not bad for something considered waste. The timing of when animals accessed these leftovers mattered greatly. One medieval farming text advises, send in geese first to eat seeds, then sheep for top leaves, then cows for stems, then pigs to root what remains. This sequential grazing ensured each animal got what it could best digest. Fruit orchards provided another bounty of agricultural leftovers. After human harvesting, animals were allowed to clean up fallen and bruised fruits. Pigs particularly thrived on windfall apples and pears, which contain natural sugars that help fatten them before winter. Some medieval records mention dedicated pig days in community orchards, specific times when individual families could bring their pigs to clean up under fruit trees. Even crop failures became animal feeding opportunities. If a grain field was damaged by weather or pests to the point where human harvest wasn't worthwhile, the entire crop would be turned over to animals. This transformed potential disaster into valuable feed, helping ensure that even in bad years, animals could be maintained. Even weeds became valuable feed resources. Thistles, nettles, and dock, plants that farmers pulled from fields to protect crops, were gathered into piles for goats, who happily munched these prickly problems away. Medieval goats were basically weed whackers with attitude, turning garden annoyances into milk and meat. While plants provided plenty of nutrition, medieval farmers still had one more trick up their sleeves. Medieval chickens and ducks weren't fed store-bought pellets full of protein. Instead, they hunted their own high-protein snacks all day long. These backyard birds were expert insect exterminators, gobbling up beetles, worms, snails, grubs, and spiders with impressive enthusiasm. Watching chickens hunt bugs is like seeing tiny feathered velociraptors in action. They scratch, peck, and dart around with surprising speed and focus. Medieval records show that a flock of just 10 chickens could clear an estimated 5 to 7 pounds of insects and grubs from a garden area each week during summer months. Free pest control that also produced eggs as a bonus. These medieval chickens were basically the original organic pest management system, except they paid rent with breakfast. Medieval peasants weren't passive about this insect hunting. They actively helped their birds find these protein-rich treats. On warm days, they'd use sticks to stir compost piles and manure heaps, exposing fat worms and even maggots that came writhing to the surface. Chickens would come running at the first disturbance of these piles, knowing a feast awaited. Contemporary farming manuals advised turning compost specifically when chickens were nearby to maximize insect consumption. Wet weather brought special opportunities for free protein harvesting. After rain, slugs and snails emerged in greater numbers, and peasants, often children, would gather these slimy creatures by hand and toss them directly into poultry pens. One 15th century household account mentions a child collecting over 200 snails after a heavy rain. A protein bonanza for the family's ducks. Medieval kids weren't playing video games after rainstorms, they were on slug safari, hunting the world's slowest game. The cleverest peasants created insect-attracting environments near their chicken coops. Some would deliberately leave small piles of hay, straw, or leaves in slightly damp areas near coops, allowing these piles to become bug breeding grounds. When bugs had properly colonized these piles, the peasants would shake them out over the chicken yard, creating an insect shower that sent the birds into a feeding frenzy. Old rotting logs were treated as valuable chicken feeding resources. Records show some villagers would drag fallen logs near their chicken yards, let them rot for months, then periodically roll them over to expose the insects living underneath. One farming text recommends having at least 3 good rotting logs for every dozen hens, the medieval equivalent of protein supplement containers. Unlike other feeding methods that required planting, harvesting, or processing, this bug hunting approach needed minimal human effort, just a sharp eye for insect habitats and an occasional poke with a stick. The medieval version of shake and bake was more like shake and cluck. Just disturb a habitat and let the hungry birds do the rest. Some particularly resourceful peasants even developed specialized tools for bug harvesting. Simple wooden paddles were used to knock beetles from garden plants directly into waiting chicken areas. Small wooden rakes helped turn over the top layer of soil in garden beds after harvest, exposing grubs and worms that had been feeding on crop roots. These bug harvesting tools were often made during winter months when other farm work slowed down. This bug-based feeding system created a perfect win-win situation. Chickens got high-quality protein that improved their egg production and health, while villages and farms enjoyed natural pest control that reduced disease-carrying insects and crop-damaging pests. Medieval peasants understood the nutritional value of these crawling critters even without scientific analysis. They noticed that chickens with access to abundant bugs laid eggs with brighter, more orange yolks. Something modern science confirms is due to the high levels of carotenoids and other nutrients found in insects. They also observed that bug hunting chickens were more disease-resistant and productive compared to those without insect access. During particularly productive insect seasons, some households would even collect extra beetles, grasshoppers, and other large bugs, dry them in the sun, and store them in clay pots for winter feeding, an early form of protein preservation that ensured some insect nutrition continued even in colder months. Dried insects could be crumbled and mixed with other feeds when fresh bugs weren't available. All these methods worked well during the warm seasons, but as temperatures dropped and insects disappeared, medieval farmers needed different strategies to keep their animals fed through the lean, cold months ahead. When winter's icy grip tightened around medieval villages, feeding animals became a serious challenge. Unlike today, there were no feed stores or online deliveries to fall back on. Survival depended entirely on what peasants had preserved from the warmer months. Storing free feed for winter was perhaps the most crucial skill in the medieval livestock keeper's toolkit. Haymaking was not just an activity, but an art form with strict timing. Peasants didn't cut just any grass. They watched for the perfect moment when meadow plants had reached full growth but hadn't yet gone to seed. Folk wisdom captured in a 14th century farming almanac advised, "Cut when the dew has dried, but before the sun has baked out the goodness." This timing maximized both the volume and nutritional value of the hay. Studies of medieval haymaking suggest that properly timed cutting could increase protein content by up to 20% compared to hay cut too early or too late. Medieval hay storage was the original game of agricultural Tetris. How much can you stack in your barn loft without the whole thing coming crashing down? Not having enough land for hayfields didn't stop clever peasants. They collected dried stalks from roadsides, forest clearings, and anywhere else plants grew tall. These weren't just random grasses either. Medieval herders could identify dozens of different plant species by sight and knew which ones provided the best nutrition. Records from one English village show that a single peasant family might gather hay from as many as 15 different locations to feed their animals through winter. Leaf fodder became another crucial winter feed source. Throughout summer and early autumn, peasants collected leafy branches from specific trees like elm, ash, and linden, bundling them while still green. The bundles were hung to dry in attics or outbuildings until the leaves became crispy but still attached to the branches. When winter came, these leaf bundles, called tree hay in some regions, were fed to goats and sheep, who eagerly stripped the nutritious dried leaves and sometimes even nibbled the smallest twigs. Vegetable preservation took specific forms for animal feed. Cabbage stalks, after the heads were harvested for human food, were strung up in bundles and allowed to dry. The dried stalks, though too tough for people, proved perfectly digestible for cattle when rehydrated in warm water. A typical medieval household might hang dozens of these stalks from barn rafters, creating what looked like bizarre vegetable decorations but was actually crucial winter survival food. Root cellars served both humans and animals. The coolest, dampest corners stored turnips, beets, and other root crops that could last for months. When these vegetables began to sprout or soften, making them less desirable for human consumption, they were redirected to animal feed. One recorded practice involved grating old turnips into water to create a nutritious slurry that could be fed to pigs and chickens. Nothing says medieval animal care quite like spending hours grating mushy turnips for your livestock, true love in its most aromatic form. Grain chaff and seed husks saved from threshing became valuable winter feed when soaked in hot water. This practice, mentioned in several medieval farming guides, softened the fibrous material and made it more digestible. Some clever peasants even fermented these mixtures in wooden tubs, creating a primitive form of silage that animals found particularly appealing during cold months. Even crushed eggshells were saved throughout the year, dried by the hearth, and stored in clay pots. Come winter, these were mixed into chicken feed to provide crucial calcium that helped maintain egg production during the darkest months. Medieval chickens didn't get fancy calcium supplements. They got recycled housing. Talk about sustainable living. The knowledge of which stored feeds to give which animals at what times was passed down through generations. Detailed folk knowledge determined exactly when to switch from hay to dried leaves or when to start feeding stored root vegetables. Medieval manuscripts describe careful feeding schedules that allocated scarce winter resources to keep all animals alive until spring grass appeared. Some communities even maintained detailed records of winter feed consumption to improve storage plans for the following year. Perhaps most impressive was the medieval understanding of animal nutritional needs without modern science. They observed that pregnant ewes fed dried clover leaves had stronger lambs, that cows given fermented chaff produced richer milk, and that horses working in snow needed more stored hay. This carefully planned system of foraged, saved, and stored free feed kept animals alive through winter without requiring peasants to purchase expensive grain or hay. These resourceful medieval peasants truly mastered the art of getting something for nothing, a free feeding system that sustained generations through harsh winters and lean years.